Sunday. Last Sunday, of course, was our ending homecoming, so things were a little bit disruptive. We didn't have as many people as able to be here. But I just wanted to review this slide, which is a summary of the mountain that we talked about last Sunday, which was the Mount of Olives. There were a lot of significant events that happened there. I just want to kind of summarize in saying that Jesus entered in and had the triumphal entry from Bethany from the Mount of Olives. So when we celebrate, I want to say Palm Sunday, when we celebrate and have the palm leaves here, that is in reference to when Jesus rode in on a donkey, and that happened from the Mount of Olives. Also, at the base of the Mount of Olives is where the Garden of Gethsemane is, where Jesus prayed, where his sweat was like great drops of blood, and also where he was betrayed. It was where he ascended up into heaven, and more importantly, and what Daryl had read for us in Zechariah, it was the prophecy that also Jesus is going to descend on the Mount of Olives. On that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives east of Jerusalem, and the Mount of Olives will be split in two from east to west, forming a great valley, with half the mountain moving to the north and half to the south. So that concluded up on the Mount of Olives for us here, and today we're going to be starting into Mount Zion. Mount Zion in the Bible, this is a really difficult kind of thing because, as I had mentioned last week, Zion is a physical place, but it's also a spiritual place. And what I've kind of come to learn through doing this is that what we think of Mount Zion now is not actually where Mount Zion is. And that's going to be, I think, really powerful for us to learn about. It was for me. So in the Bible, when Zion is mentioned, Zion refers to Jerusalem, and more specifically, Mount Zion is the hill that is captured by King David. So it's an actual hill, a place, and when King David assumes the city, when he overtakes the city, he overtakes Mount Zion. Oftentimes, and as I said, Zion in the Bible, it references the entire city. So it's not talking about one particular region, but the city of Jerusalem as a whole. It's also referred to as the city of David, the city of God, God's holy mountain. And then it also takes on meaning as the people of Israel, and ultimately synonymous with the New Jerusalem. So it's referenced in the Bible with several different names and terms, and any time you see and you're reading in the Old Testament and it talks about the city of David or the city of God or God's holy mountain, this all references back to Zion. And also there are messages through the prophets that are given by God, and it's saying Zion, and it's talking about the people that live there as well. But also in the New Jerusalem, in the coming back, we talked about just in Zechariah, the prophecy of Jesus coming back to the Mount of Olives and the mountain being split in two, and there's going to be a new kingdom or a new heaven and a new earth, and this is the New Jerusalem. So you all can see how Zion, you think, you just want to identify it as a particular place and pin it down and see it, as the mountains we had before. And while we can to some extent, we're missing the entire meaning of what Zion is. So Zion is all of these things that we just mentioned: the city of David, the city of God, God's holy mountain, the New Jerusalem. It's a physical place, but it's also a spiritual place. So let's go over just a few Bible verses of where Zion is or what it is. First in Jeremiah 31:23. This is what the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, says: when I restore them from captivity, they will once again speak this word in the land of Judah and its cities. May the Lord bless you, O righteous dwelling place, O holy mountain. here Jeremiah is talking about the Israelites that were taken captive into Babylon, and they're saying that he's going to restore them from captivity. So he's making a prophecy here. And it says, "May the Lord bless you, O righteous dwelling place, O holy mountain." So Zion is a place, and this is really my favorite definition, I guess, of what Zion is, a righteous habitation. And that takes on meaning of both a physical place, a place where God is, but also a place that makes it righteous by the presence of God. It's a place where God dwells, and in doing so, it's a righteous place. So it's a spiritual place as well as a physical place. In Isaiah 8:18, "Here am I and the children whom the Lord has given me. We are for signs and wonders in Israel from the Lord of hosts who dwells in Mount Zion." So not only here is it a righteous habitation, Zion is a place where God dwells. Our next verse is from Isaiah. This is 24:23. "The moon will be confounded, and the sun will be ashamed, for the Lord of hosts will reign on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, and before his elders with great glory." So Mount Zion is also a place where God reigns. And finally here in Isaiah 59:20, it's a place of promise. "The Redeemer will come to Zion, to those in Jacob who turn from transgression, declares the Lord." So there's a lot of prophecy surrounding Zion, a lot of mention of Zion through the Old Testament. So I think it's important for us to get a handle on what this place is and its relevance to us. Now, if we look up and if we Google Mount Zion today, this is the location that we will get. It's a city in Jerusalem. Mount Zion is a current day location, and it's a really hot tourist place. I've never been to Jerusalem. Libby, have you been to Jerusalem? I'd love to do that. And was actually looking at some tours, but now things have been getting a little more dangerous over there. But if you travel to Jerusalem, you will likely go on one of these walking sites here, because it has a lot of important events happen here. Primarily, there is a location there called St. Peter in Gilicantu, and this is the church where Peter was thought to have denied Jesus 3 times. And they have, at this church, they have like a rooster there to signify that event happened. And also what they have unearthed, I think it was not too long ago in this century, that were the steps, and you can see those pictured there, steps that were used in the time of Christ, and he probably would have descended them. So these are steps that Jesus would have walked down from the Last Supper to Gethsemane. I just think that would be amazing to see, and I don't think you can walk on those steps now. It looks like they have them fenced in, but I just think that would be amazing to think that you're literally walking in the steps that Jesus walked before he was ultimately betrayed, or any steps that he walked in that matter. Also, in modern-day Mount Zion is the room of the Last Supper, and also where King David is buried. So when I was doing these mountains and I was looking at where they are currently, I came to Mount Zion, and even last Sunday, once I had my slides already ready for Mount Zion, and I started to introduce it. We didn't have time, and I felt like I had gotten to a stopping place, but I also felt like I just didn't have a good handle on it. I felt like something was missing, because this is modern day Mount Zion. These are the events that happen. But to me here, while they were significant, they didn't correlate to me the meaning of biblical Zion. Because we just read all those verses of what Zion is, and then when I'm looking at a modern day Mount Zion and the things that happen there, I was just losing those connections. Like, then is it more of a spiritual significance, Mount Zion? I couldn't correlate the things that had happened there with what the Old Testament and the Bible was talking about as far as what Mount Zion is and what it means ultimately. So, let's see, that was my question, is the New Jerusalem coming to the place of the Last Supper and David's tomb? That just, it wasn't resonating with me. And then it ultimately led to the question, then where is the real Mount Zion? And really what happened next, it was amazing, because once I found out where it was through a YouTube video, through doing some research, not that YouTube is the place to do research, but really you can find a lot of like good informative videos, and I found one on there of a man describing where the biblical Mount Zion is, and then it all came together. So that's what I want to talk about, is where the biblical Mount Zion is and how that is significant in terms of the Old Testament prophecies. And it's what we've talked about before, how people say that there are X number of prophecies in the Old Testament that lead us to Jesus in the New Testament. But how, when you say that, you miss these little nuances of Jesus filling things up with meaning. There wasn't a direct prophecy that this will happen and it will cause this to happen. But it's like Jesus filled up the Old Testament messages in these Old Testament verses with just a meaning that only he could. And I know that doesn't necessarily make sense, but we're going to go over specific examples of how he did that in Mount Zion. So it brings us back to this question, where is the real Mount Zion? Let's turn to Psalm 48. Let's do that. I think I want to have somebody read that. Let me make sure the verse. Okay, it's going to be, it's Psalm 48, and it is verse 1 and 2. Let's grab a mic. I want to involve you all. Do we do the red mic, Wayne? Is there a mic? Green mic? Red mic? Psalm 48, verses 1 and 2. No pressure. Who wants to read it? Carrie. I know you don't need one, but they're on live, and if you read it, they won't be able to hear it.
48, 1 and 2. Yeah. Thank you. 48, 1 and 2. Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised in the city of our God, in the mountain of his holiness. Beautiful for situation, the joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great King.
Okay, so here is the verse that he read. Psalm 48. They say, city of our God in his holy mountain. So before I was referencing other names that were synonymous with Mount Zion, and those are two that are city of our God, holy mountain, beautiful in elevation, is Mount Zion on the sides of the north in the city of the great King. So this gives us a location and a place. It's north to the city of the great King. So the question is, who is the great King? Who would you all think? This was written by David. So some people think, I mean, it could be God, but it's not. It's not. And it's not David either. That's who I thought y'all were going to guess. That's who I would guess. Because David is not referencing himself in here. He's not saying that he's the great king. So we have to find out who is the great king that's being referenced here so that we can find out what's north of this. And the great king is Melchizedek. Melchizedek. So we've opened up our can of worms. Melchizedek is known in the Bible and references the king of peace, the king of righteousness. And we see this in Genesis 14, 18 through 20. And I think in times past when I've heard about Melchizedek, it's been like, he's not a character in the Bible that I can immediately place and reference and understand who he is and what he did. And I'm going to do my best to try and explain what I've found out and try and kind of unearth who this character is in the Bible of Melchizedek. So Melchizedek, okay, we're going to read here in Genesis 14, 18 through 20. This is when he is first ever mentioned in the Bible. This is the first mention that we hear about him. And Abraham, he's not had Isaac yet. Abraham has won and fought an important battle. And after this, he meets Melchizedek, king of Salem. And Melchizedek brings out bread and wine. And the Bible says he was the priest of God Most High. And he blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abraham by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." And Abram gave him a tenth of everything. So Melchizedek at this time, he is referenced as the king of Salem. The king of Salem, Salem is also thought to be Jerusalem. So I just found this really confounding. I don't know if you all find this confusing as well. Abraham is considered, the father of the Jewish faith. He is who first believed, who first obeyed and had the faith to step out and do what God had commanded him to do. And he had the faith at this time and had moved his family, but he had not yet had Isaac. So really, the whole Jewish lineage had not yet been established. And this is even before, we're talking about the foundations of the Jewish faith and religion. This is before Moses received the Ten Commandments, before there were delineations, who should be priests, and here is the king of peace that's coming out to Abraham, and it says he was priest of God Most High. How could, the priestly lineage through the Levites, that was like thousands of years away, and here there was already established a priest. And so I was talking over with John, I said, how could he be a priest? And so let's talk about that. So the next time that we here, well, I don't know, there may be some mentions of it in between, but in the New Testament, the verse that we often think of in reference to Melchizedek is in Hebrews 7:17. And it says here, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." What does that mean? What does that mean? And what it means here, even though Melchizedek was not in the Levitical priesthood, because we talked about that, Abraham has just come to believe in God. He's following him, obeying his commandments, keep on wanting to say Noah. Moses is 1,000 years ahead. He's not even established the priesthood. There's no priest, so he was not a Levitical priest. And this is important here. He did not depend on genealogical right to be a priest. The Levites were a specific tribe. You had to be a Levite to be a priest. This was the entire Jewish heritage that had been set forth. But here, even before this was laid out, was Melchizedek, known as the priest most high, priest of the God most high. And he did not depend on the genealogical right to be a priest. And this whole chapter in Hebrews is teasing that out and making that point known, because they are comparing Melchizedek's priesthood to be like the priesthood of Christ. Because Jesus was from the tribe of Judah. He wasn't from the tribe of the Levites, so he wasn't in the lineage that would be a priest. So Hebrews chapter 7 is comparing Melchizedek to the priesthood like Jesus. Let's see, and in doing so, qualifies Jesus to be a priest in the same way as Melchizedek did. So I'm going to let that soak in just a little bit.
So are you saying he was a priest, not a king?
Melchizedek was both a king and a priest.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
Yes, both a king and a priest. And those characteristics are also how they are comparing him to Jesus. So let's read through these verses. In Hebrews chapter 7. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, king of Jerusalem, priest of the Most High God. So here in this first chapter here, he's both a king and a priest, who met Abraham as he was returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom also gave Abraham a portion, a tenth of all the spoils. Abraham gave that to Melchizedek. I may have a typo there. Was first of all by the translation of his name, King of Righteousness, and then also King of Salem, which is King of Peace. Without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, he remains a priest perpetually. And here they are describing Melchizedek. This whole verse involves the description of him. He is a king. He is a priest of the God Most High. Abraham gave to him a tenth of all the spoils. And it says, translating his name, he's the King of Righteousness, and then also the King of Salem, King of Peace. But then this verse here, it says, he without father, he didn't have a father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor the end of life, but made like the Son of Man, he remains a priest perpetually. So that puts him in similarity to Jesus. But Melchizedek was a person. He was a person that lived, a person that, ruled over this city, and he was a foreshadowing of Jesus, but this was not Jesus. Melchizedek is not a replacement for Jesus. He wasn't an early Jesus that come at this time. Because what this verse means, it says without father, without mother, and without genealogy. And it says he didn't have beginning of days nor end of life. So does that mean that, he was born of immaculate conception, had no origins, and then therefore lived forever? That's not what the author is trying to communicate here. It's saying that there was no record. Because we looked back in Genesis and we read the account of the Old Testament of Melchizedek and what was related to us. And what wasn't related to us was Melchizedek's lineage, his genealogy. And you all know, reading through the Old Testament scriptures, they will tell you who begot who. Who begot who? But they did not describe that for Melchizedek. So here's a person that seemingly came out of nowhere, who was a priest and who was blessed by Abraham, and there was no record of his beginnings. And in such, the author here in Hebrews is comparing Jesus to Melchizedek in that way. He's a foreshadowing, and they call that a typology, meaning a type of, a simulation of. And I think it's important here we just read a little bit further into Hebrews chapter 7. These are verses 14 through 28. And this is just further explaining it. I think you all can get a little bit more from us proceeding on through these verses. For it is evident that our Lord was descended from Judah, a tribe with reference to which Moses said nothing concerning priests. And this is clear still. If another priest arises according to the likeness of Melchizedek, who has become a priest not on the basis of a law of physical requirement, but according to the power of an indestructible life. For it is attested of him, and this is what we read before, you are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. By the same extent, Jesus also has become the guarantee of a better covenant. Who can say amen to that? He continues forever, holds his priesthood permanently. Therefore, he is also able to see forever those who come to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. Who's thankful for that? For it was fitting for us to have such a high priest, holy, innocent, undefiled, separated from sinners. This is talking about Jesus, and exalted above the heavens, who has no need, like those high priests, to offer up sacrifices, first for his own sins and then for the sins of people, because he did this once for all time when he offered up himself. For the law appoint men as high priests who are weak, but the word of the oath which came after the law appointed a son who has been made perfect forever. Amen. So this is all talking about Jesus, how he is the ultimate and the final sacrifice, how Melchizedek was an image of him to come, and in that same vein, in that same likeness came Jesus. They couldn't trace his lineage back to a priesthood of the Levites because he was in the order of Melchizedek, who was not noted to have any beginnings or any end. It was a figure that was mentioned. But in that same way, Jesus came to fulfill the scriptures that was not necessarily prophesied, and did so in a way that lasted forever. So it brings us back to the question that we were trying to answer earlier from Psalm 48 that Pastor Darrell read here. Beautiful in elevation, the joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great King. So we now know the city of the great King to be Melchizedek, who was the king of Jerusalem. Jerusalem in this map you can see is the populated area down toward the south. So then what is toward the north? If Mount Zion is located to the north of the city of the great King, I'm terrible with directions. I've tried. Then what is to the north here? This is Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah is the biblical Mount Zion. And I know you all are soaking this in, because I was soaking it in. I felt like, doing this list, and I was trying to look up, when I first started, the main mountains, the important mountains where something happened. And I always felt like I need to do Mount Moriah. I need to talk about that. But then I thought people are going to be so overwhelmed with mountains. They're going to be over mountains by the time I'm done. So I was like, I'm not going to do that one. I'm just going to leave it to this list. And so, like I was saying, I was trying to do research, and it wasn't connecting for me where Mount Zion was and the meaning of this. And then, I found this description and this teaching, and it brought us back to Psalm 48, where it described in the Bible where Mount Zion is. It's the city to the north of the great king, and that location is Mount Moriah. And in your mind, I wouldn't expect you to. I never did before looking at this. What happened on Mount Moriah? We could maybe think of a few things that happened. The first thing was where Abraham goes to sacrifice Isaac. But when we look at all of the things that happen on Mount Moriah, this is the slide that we get here. Abraham goes to sacrifice Isaac. David conquers the city from the Jebusites. David purchases the threshing floor. Solomon builds God's house on the threshing floor. This is the location of the first temple. And then Jesus is separated from his parents at the temple, and he tells them, I had to be in my Father's house. So my Father's house, his dwelling place, is located here. And also, it's where Jesus cleanses the temple, where he throws out all the merchants and the business people who are making money from there. So you can see the list of the important events that happen on Mount Moriah. And when we think back to the list I had of modern day Mount Zion and the things that occurred there, like those would be meaningful and powerful to visit and to experience, to go to Jerusalem and experience in this day and time. But when we look at the events that happen on Mount Moriah, you can see that this really digs into the foundations of our faith, and also the promise of our faith going forward. So it is Mount Moriah, the city to the north, that is the actual Mount Zion. So what we're going to do now is, I think, probably just introduce this timeline, because going through each one of these, I don't plan to do that. I don't plan to exhaustively go through each one, but I do want to bring out some important things, because these are the things that I was saying earlier. That's like a messianic prophecy of, it's not a direct X or A plus B equals C. It's not a direct prophecy that was made, but in each one of these events that happen on Mount Moriah, they all point to Jesus. Every single one of them in some way. And it starts with Abraham's sacrificing Isaac. And we can all think in our minds how that is a typology, how that is a precursor and an illustration to God giving his only son and sacrificing his only son. So let's see. I think we have some time just to go in through the first one. I debated on whether or not to read this. Here we see the ram that's caught in the thicket. What happens is Abraham is told by God to sacrifice Isaac. And so he takes him up to Mount Moriah. And he does so solemnly. Let me just turn to that. I don't want to degrade the story in any way by my poor summarization. So God asks of Abraham, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, Go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. So I think it's important here to say this is the land of Moriah, not actually the mountain of Moriah. So this is kind of like a range of an area, but it is thought and traced back that the actual mountain that he sacrifices on, that became landed as Mount Moriah, even though initially it's saying into the land. And God says he's going to tell him a specific area in order which to sacrifice Isaac on. And I think this is another kind of poignant part of the story. They're walking together. Abraham is getting the wood ready. He is getting the altar ready. And meanwhile, Isaac is with him this entire time. Then Isaac spoke to his father Abraham and said, "My father?" And he replied, "Here I am, my son." Isaac said, "The fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." Then the two of them walked on together. So that was Abraham's faith in God that he had. This was never a command that God had for someone to sacrifice their children. He never intended on that. And that's why I wanted to write here on this slide here that God tests us to confirm and to strengthen, while Satan tests to corrupt and weaken. Because we think, why would God ask somebody to sacrifice his son? And we know going forward that God had a plan and that he provided this ram in the thicket here that you see pictured to offer as a substitution. So for Abraham, he allowed the substitution to be made, for another sacrifice to be made. But ultimately, God himself provided Jesus, who was the substitution for us. He provided his own son to provide the sacrifice for us. So I don't want to get too much further into this because I feel like we've taken on a whole lot of information today. I want to just review this. Let me go way back to where we started. I guess we'll go to the beginning. Okay, so we're talking about Mount Zion. Mount Zion is Jerusalem, and Mount Zion is the hill that is captured by King David. But in the Bible, it references, it talks about Zion as the city of David. It's also called the city of God, God's holy mountain, the people of Israel, and also the location of where the new Jerusalem is going to be. It is both a physical place and a spiritual place. It's God's righteous habitation. It's a place where he dwells. It's a place where he reigns. Zion is a place of promise to come. When we look at on a map, modern day Mount Zion is where Peter denied Christ, where the church is now. There's the room of the Last Supper, and you can also visit King David's tomb. But when we look at in the Bible through Psalm 48 to describe where Jerusalem or where Mount Zion is, it's described as Mount Zion is on the sides of the north of the city of the great king. And the great king we've learned is Melchizedek, and Melchizedek is a type of, I don't want to even say a type of Jesus. It's a foreshadowing and similar to Jesus in that he had no documented beginning or end, and he was a priest established before there were even priests. So I hope you all soak that in. I hope you all soak that in, and I want to just show you where we're going to go with this. This is the timeline. We're now talking about the Mount Moriah, which is biblical Mount Zion. And we're going to be talking about each one of these things, each one of these important events that happen on Mount Moriah, and ultimately how they all point to Jesus. For us, I've learned so much, and what we want to talk about next time is how David conquers the city, and then the threshing floor. These were so powerful to me. I was sitting at our table just crying, really, because of the revelation that I learned from what each one of these means. And I hope, and I know that you all will be just inspired and thankful for it, because it establishes the plan that God has for us. I think so much in our day-to-day lives, we feel, I want to say, monotonous and mundane, and we think of ourselves as how we could be unimportant, and we just really get down. But to read and to learn about the plan that God had for us from his establishments, from really the beginning of time, how he knew us before we even were, but to see the plan that he laid out for us, and the revelation that Jesus brings, and the filling up with meaning that each one of these events has, I think it will really inspire you and bring you closer, feeling closer to God, knowing that he had this was all planned. It was all planned. It was all planned. It was all laid out for us, and we are not here by chance, and our lives are not meaningless. But in reading through these and understanding these more, we can feel more significant in God because of this, because he planned it out. Not just because we happen to be here and we happen to get saved and we happen to choose him, but because God chose us, and in that we have, I don't even want to say like a responsibility, but like being able to know this, I think that you all will just become really more powerful Christians, because it's something that I didn't know before, and something that has really reassured me. So I want to conclude with that. I know it was a lot of information to take in. Next Sunday, we'll just kind of review over through those slides again. If you all need any of those verses, I'll be happy to give them to you. But I hope you all are as excited about this as I am. And I know it's going to take, because I've been doing this for like a few weeks and kind of dwelling on it, and I'm just throwing all of this information out here to you all on a Sunday morning within a certain time span. So I know it's going to take some time to sink in, but like I said, we're going to review it, and then we're going to go even further. Amen. Amen. Thank you.